Hello, and welcome to the Planeswalker project. I forced myself to resume existing on the internet for the sake of getting my cringy magic opinions out in the open. Anyway, it's that time of year where Wizards' constant output of product has now got us Commander players in its sights. And so to try to revive this barely functioning channel, I want to talk about the new Ikoria Commander precon decks. We're going to go through each one, look at some of the quality and quantity of reprints, some of the newer cards that might be worth a look, and some upgrades I think might make the deck run a little smoother. Today we are looking at the Jeskai cycling deck, Timeless Wisdom, and so without further ado, let me avoid padding this video for ads and get to it. The main commander of the Timeless Wisdom deck is Gavi Nestwarden. For 5 mana, you get a 2/5 human shaman. She has 2 abilities, the first letting you pay 0 rather than pay the normal cycling cost of the first card that you cycle each turn. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, you create a 2/2 red and white dinosaur cat token. So, one important thing to note is that you can cycle cards on your off turns, so during your opponent's turns you can still cycle cards, that first one being free. This is important to note as some of the cards in the deck become even more effective when you have that element of surprise on your opponent's turn. Having the ability to create tokens with her second ability is a little harder, but it's still capable of giving you some valuable plays. After looking through the deck list, I've concluded that Gavi is definitely the best option for building that cycling deck, and so if you want to upgrade the deck and fine-tune that strategy, Gavi is your best bet. I would also say one of the best ways to pilot the deck is to cast her as soon as possible so as to begin getting value from her cycling benefits. The secondary commander in this deck is Akeem the Soaring Wind, a 3/4 bird dinosaur for 5 mana. This flying creature has a triggered ability and an activated ability. Whenever you create 1 or more tokens for the first time each turn, you create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. And then for 6 mana, creature tokens you control gain double strike until the end of turn. So, Akeem falls into the category I refer to as build an entirely different deck just for them. Akeem wants tokens, and while the Gavi strategy, you do have a few routes where you might create a token or two, I really don't think that that strategy substantiates running Akeem as the commander of the precon deck. I can imagine a proper strategy built around creating tokens, as you can generate a lot of value using cards like Assemble the Legion, Impact Tremors, Divine Visitation, and so on. But I feel that if you really want to build Akeem as your commander, it would really be best to do a lot of rebuilding from the ground up to really maximize the impact. Lastly, we have the pairing of Brawlin and Shabraz, whom I find to be a bit of a quirky pairing. Brawlin cares when you discard a card, letting you ping each opponent while making her a little stronger. You can also pay 1 red to give a target shark trample until the end of turn, which, while that indicates a potential shark tribal commander deck, it really just focuses on Shabraz directly. Shabraz, on the other hand, Finn, is a flying Sharko who gets a +1/+1 counter on them whenever you draw a card and then you gain a life. You can also pay 1 of either white or blue to give a target human flying until the end of turn. Again, really just supporting Brawlin, but still possible as an Azorius human deck. Now, you are entirely able to build these 2 individual cards into their own deck and say sawed off to the other partner. Not the optimal choice, but still possible. I would almost consider these 2 to be of a potential Voltron strategy, focusing on using the cycling mechanic to bolster the 2 cards' individual stats before plowing in for a ton of damage. I still prefer Gavi due to the value of her cost reduction clause, but I also maybe would consider these 2 to utilize the cycling mechanic for maybe a bit more of an aggressive, less tokeny stance. So next I want to take a look at the quality of reprints in the precon deck. This has become quite of a problematic area for commander precon decks, as with the last few years, the reprint choices we've seen is rather lackluster. Some notable reprints from this deck are Sun Titan, the Locust God, Arcane Signet, and that's it. I have to say that I find much of this deck is comprised of relevant bulk. Cards like Abandoned Sarcophagus, Fluctuator, Astral Drift, Hoofprints of the Stag, they all work well within the context of a cycling-themed deck, but none of these cards were in any sort of screaming needs reprint. We got a full suite of Signets and Mana Rocks, although I do wish Thought Vessel was included there. Even the Planeswalker Chandra Flamecaller is a bulk rare. This is just an underlying problem with all Commander precon decks, as while the majority of the cards included, especially in this year, are on theme to whatever the deck's foundation wants, there isn't a lot of slots that are allotted to cards that the overall Commander format needs reprints of. Now that being said, you can't just stick something like Rhystic Study into one of these decks and call it a day. The card has to be relevant to what the deck wants to do. And while I do think that something like Rhystic Study would have been an excellent addition to this deck, I don't see it happening in any precon deck anytime soon. The underlying design of these decks is to be of entry-level power levels, something that a player new to the format can grab, bust open, and get in a game of Commander with very little issue. But that aside, let's talk about new cards. This deck in particular is the money deck of the set, with the free counterspell Fierce Guardianship being this year's true name nemesis. This is a free to cast counterspell, provided you control a commander. This could be your commander or your opponent's, based on my interpretation of the text of the card. If any judges would like to correct my more than likely misreading, please feel free. I'm only mildly a fan of the Impetus cycle, in which we get one of each of the deck's 3 colors. These can be fun in a multiplayer setting, but I myself am not sold on any of them yet. Oddly enough, while the related Ikoria Lair Behemoth set introduced the land cycle of Triomes, tri-color lands that enter tapped, have basic land types, and cycling, I am surprised that Raugan Triome was not included in the precon, and I guess this is to push buying Ikoria product to supplement these precons. Now, a card I really like for this deck is Herald of the Forgotten. This is one of the few times that I feel a card that has a high mana cost in a precon actually brings an impactful presence to the table that I would say is okay sitting that high on the curve. After cycling away dozens of cards, it is brutal, potentially game-ending, to bring every single one of them back to the battlefield untapped, and it's a 6/6 with flying. Now for mana base. I understand that these are $40 precon decks and that they're not meant to have optimized mana bases, but of the 39 lands included in the deck, a whopping 16 enter the battlefield tapped. 6 only generate colorless mana, and given that this is not a color combination we ramp efficiently to begin with, this mana base is rough. Yes, we have 11 lands that have cycling on them, and those lands contribute to the deck's theme. It is problematic to have more than half of your lands enter the battlefield tapped. This is detrimental to having mana available to cycle cards with, to cast spells with, and just generally do things on curve. This commander deck lacks any new designed for commander lands like we've seen in previous releases, and considering that the Brawl precons we got last year for Eldraine each contained a shockland, it's a little bit disappointing that we didn't get any lands of reasonable quality with these precons. Now, a lot of folks have talked about which of these decks has the strongest power level, and I would definitely rank this as perhaps the strongest of the 5. It has value that can be attained in a number of ways without a whole lot of deck modification. I, being the genius I am at this game, entirely misunderstood cycling cards for the entirety of the time I've played Magic, not knowing that you can cycle cards on your off turns, and suddenly this deck became monumentally stronger. The thing I particularly like about Gavi is that her second ability to generate tokens doesn't care whether or not the card draw is relevant to cycling. Simply adding cards that you draw on your opponent's turns, like Rhystic Study, Consecrated Sphinx, and such, make it far easier to make tokens. The cycling cost reduction is even more added value, as you can use your mana that would be otherwise used to cycle those bulky spells, like Decree of Annihilation, to do other things, and this will net you a ton of additional mana. Now, for some upgrades I would recommend, I genuinely feel like cutting the impetuses, some of the alternate commanders, and generally anything not relevant to drawing cards or cycling are really hindering where this deck can actually go. Cards that are high on the mana curve that don't really have a real game-ending kind of feel, those should definitely go as well. Now, cards like the aforementioned Rhystic Study and Consecrated Sphinx are sort of the top-end pricey cards to add, giving you a few powerful draw engines. Astral Slide, a slightly different variant of Astral Drift, lets you exile a target creature for the turn whenever a player cycles a card. I found that with Astral Drift, it is a great protection against some threats, letting a player exile a creature and getting it completely out of the way, either on that player's turn so that they can't attack with it, or to remove a potential blocker. Now, getting 2 triggers of this basically same ability is just added value. Cards like Wall of Omens is sort of something I'm on the fence with, letting you draw a card when it enters the battlefield, targeting this with one of the astral enchantments, and you'll net an additional card with this every turn as well. Forsake the Worldly is another nice naturalized effect with cycling. Riel the Everwise is such a powerhouse in so many of this year's Commander's decks, getting buffed for all of the instants and sorceries in the graveyard, as well as letting you draw extra cards when you discard them away. This will ensure you will always get your Cat Dinosaur token with Gavi's cycling ability, even if you only cycle away 1 card. If you wanted to go for a more token route, even Wind Guide, as well as a few of the other Embalm Eternalized cards from Amonkhet, can give your tokens a lot more value. But generally speaking, I would only do so if you really wanted to and were capable of brewing the cycling strategy and having room for token stuff. Sanctum Plowbeast is something that might cost a lot, but I would much rather use it for its cycling ability as mana fixing. Since this deck does not contain green, we need to find other means to ramp, and this big beastie is perfect to get any plains or island card, basic or non-basic, to our hand. Mad Ratter gives you 2 1/1 rat tokens whenever you draw your second card during a turn, giving you an additional trigger and 2 fuzzy friends to Gavi's cat dinos. I would also say that Laboratory Maniac, that sort of effect is crucial in the deck, as I feel like you might overdo it with the draw and end up decking yourself out, but I could be wrong about that. Countervailing Winds is a really neat counterspell that gives the option of an opponent paying an extra mana for each card in your graveyard to prevent the counter from doing its thing. And while I normally hate counterspells that give opponents a means to negate it, I think that with the amount of cycling this deck can do, that graveyard additional cost is going to be pretty hefty. Decree of Annihilation, that's something else. It's practically a game ender if it's included in the deck. And while the good person in me is saying that mass land destruction is a no-no in Commander, I don't feel like listening to him today, so do it. Float your mana, cycle it for free, and then watch your opponents suddenly hate you. That's what happens when you play blue. Bag of Holding is something I considered for a few decks as of late, giving you a means to recover every card that you discard for only a few mana later on to use again, and I definitely recommend at least testing that out. Now, Gavi's deck comes with neither Lightning Greaves nor Swiftfoot Boots, but I would recommend them as a means to protect your commander. Sharknado would be a fun idea to play with as well, just for the chuckle factor of creating flying sharks. Again, if you do plan to go with the token deck shenanigans, cards like Divine Visitation, which will turn anything you make into a 4/4 flying Vigilant Angel instead of cat dinos or whatnot, Impact Trevor's Perforos, which each burn your opponent whenever you create a creature, Underworld Breach, which will literally let you cast everything you want from your graveyard. I've seen this card in action, and I would say this is by far the strongest red enchantment we've seen in a while. It would be great in this deck. I would also recommend upgrading your mana base to include as many of the optimal lands, fetches, shocks, the Triome, as you can, so just to get your colors a lot smoother and on curve. In a deck that wants to have mana open to do things, it is very problematic to have those lands enter tapped. I definitely think this is one of my favorites of this year's precon decks. I love decks that you can draw cards to the extremes this deck can, and with a little tweaking and some practice, you can set up some brutal engines. Cycle away cards and draw through your deck quicker, use cards like Hoofprint of the Stag and Ominous Seas to benefit from all that card draws to get some really big bodies on the ground. This deck could benefit for some tutors to get some key engines online like Enlightened Tutor, but I don't think it's super necessary. So that is going to be the point where I wrap up my look at the Timeless Wisdom precon deck. What's your opinion of the deck? Do you think that Wizards did a good job in designing this precon? What cards do you recommend swapping in or out to upgrade the deck? Let's chat this in the down there commenty section thingy. As always, if you're new to the channel, pull up a chair and stay a while, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so whenever we manage to vom out a new video, you'll be the first to know. Like this video if, you liked it. If you want to express your distaste for ads on YouTube videos, you can support the channel better than YouTube by becoming a patron over at Patreon. I hope you enjoyed this video, hope to see you next time, and with that, I bid thee a toodaloo.